Two of the most significant individuals in contemporary gospel, Kirk Franklin and Bishop Eddie Long, have left behind legacies that millions of people adore. But for years, a secret past has subtly persisted behind the sermons, the music, and the red carpet appearances. Most fans are finally learning about links, secrets, and controversies they were unaware of. What actually took place in private? Furthermore, why are some of these stories just now coming to light? Even the most devout gospel followers will be shocked by what you're about to hear. So pay attention. In the realm of gospel music and ministry, Kirk Franklin and Bishop Eddie Long are well-known figures. With songs that connect faith, life, and culture, multi-award-winning musician Franklin has inspired millions of people. Conversely, Bishop Eddie Long established an empire of megarch and was regarded as one of the most significant pastors of his day. Few people are aware of the story that lies behind the dazzling lights, #1 songs, and thunderous preaching. One that is full of hidden history, power struggles, and controversies. The public has never really comprehended the ways in which this story unites two titans of the gospel. What's coming out now will give you a completely different perspective on their legacies. We're revealing the relationships, disputes, and issues that have long been discussed behind closed doors in this video. Some of the disclosures regarding their interactions, how they impacted one another's careers, and the scandals that rocked the gospel community will astound you. Therefore, stick with us through to the very finish, since the truths get more startling the further we go. This is where the tale really becomes intriguing, with behind-the-scenes debates and secret alliances. It's far larger than most people think. Both Kirk Franklin and Bishop Eddie Long were quietly making their reputations in gospel music and ministry before the public knew them as well-known figures. To understand how their hidden history subsequently merged, it is essential to understand their early travels. On January 26, 1970, Kirk Franklin was born in Fort Worth, Texas. He was raised mostly by his mother, and from an early age, he found expression and comfort in church music. Franklin was already leading youth choirs and experimenting with musical arrangements that combined contemporary R&B, hip-hop, and urban sounds with traditional gospel by the time he was a teenager. It was difficult for him to get the traditional church establishment to take him seriously in his early years. But this creative approach would later change gospel music. Eddie Long, meantime, was born in Charlotte, North Carolina on May 12, 1953. He was already exhibiting exceptional charisma and leadership skills by his early 20s, which ultimately led to the establishment of New Birth Missionary Baptist Church. Bishop Long instantly became well known in the church community for his dramatic sermons and commanding presence. He was known for his ability to attract large crowds and engender a strong sense of loyalty among his followers. Both guys had the same desire to impact gospel culture and reach a larger audience, but having different career trajectories. The 1990s saw the production of records that pushed limits and defied expectations, which helped Franklin's music start to gain popularity. Bishop Long was growing his ministry at the same time, establishing one of the biggest churches in the U.S., and becoming well known across the country as a result of his media appearances and leadership positions in gospel organizations. Their worlds first came into contact during this time of swift ascent. In public, their exchanges were presented as cooperative, mutual respect, and mentoring. Long's impact on inspiring new gospel musicians to bravely assume leadership roles was frequently mentioned by Franklin. Long acknowledged Franklin's ability to connect with a generation that might otherwise remain disengaged from the church. However, the relationship between them was more nuanced than the headlines indicated. The public would never see the power relationships, strategic partnerships, and behind-the-scenes discussions that took place behind closed doors. These early relationships set the stage for later contentious occurrences that sparked debate and brought up issues of accountability, influence, and moral limits in the gospel sector. This is where things start to become really interesting. Even while both men were experiencing previously unheard of levels of success, there were rumors circulating within the gospel community regarding choices made, chances given, and power used that would subsequently be questioned. It was never intended for some of these tales to leave the inner ring of gospel leadership. The relationship between Kirk Franklin and Bishop Eddie Long during their prime will be discussed in the upcoming chapter, along with the disagreements, cooperation, and behind-the-scenes tales that most people are unaware of. You won't believe what transpired when their personal relationships, influence, and goals clashed. Kirk Franklin was a revolutionary figure in gospel music by the late 1990s and early 2000s. His CDs were reaching the top of the charts, his songs were becoming popular outside of the conventional church community, and he was drawing large audiences. Bishop Eddie Long was guiding New Earth Missionary Baptist Church through a time of unparalleled expansion at the same time, firmly establishing himself as one of the most influential people in the American church. Their paths started to more clearly cross at this period of greatest effect. From the outside, the partnership seemed to go smoothly. Franklin playing at church functions in Long, promoting Franklin's performances for a long time and attending conferences that encouraged gospel unity with him. Support, guidance, and inspiration were witnessed by fans. However, the connection was far more complex behind the scenes. According to many close to the gospel community, there were times of conflict and friction in addition to sincere admiration. Kirk Franklin, who was renowned for his direct demeanor and occasionally combative manner, did not necessarily share Long's philosophy of preaching. Bishop Long was very guarded of his reputation and power, since he led a megarch with thousands of members and a strong media following. Conflicts over creative direction, public pronouncements, and event planning occasionally resulted from this. This is when the covert disputes start. Within the gospel industry, there were rumors that Franklin and Long occasionally used favors, endorsements, or unwritten agreements to influence speaking engagements, record promotions, concert bookings, and other possibilities. Even while there was never any official confirmation, these rumors pointed to a larger problem in gospel circles. Few people were willing to openly explore the ethical gray areas that could arise from the convergence of power, influence, and faith. Pressures from both the personal and professional spheres added to the complexity. Riding the tide of his musical success, Kirk Franklin had to contend with the expectations of millions of people who looked to him as a modern gospel innovator and voice of faith. Bishop Eddie Long, meantime, was dealing with the difficulties of megarch leadership, overseeing a fast-expanding congregation and navigating criticism from the media and church authorities. Both men were under a great deal of stress. Additionally, these pressures occasionally showed themselves in private as conflict, tension, and calculated moves. But many people are unaware of this startling fact. Bishop Eddie Long was the subject of accusations and legal disputes during this period, which would later take center stage in the media. Despite the complexity and delicate nature of these situations, insiders were concerned about Franklin's closeness to Long, what he knew, when he knew it, and how it affected their interactions. Some have hypothesized that loyalty and the complex nature of their relationship may have played a role in Franklin's public backing of Long at particular times. Nevertheless, the two kept working together in ways that influenced contemporary gospel culture despite disagreements and controversy. Long's networks and congregations heard Franklin's music, and Long's support and connections helped Franklin become more well-known in national gospel venues. Their cumulative effect was indisputable. However, as history clearly shows, the public was never completely aware of the levels of concealment and strategic maneuvering. The most important lesson to be learned from this is that their connection was never only one of friendship or mentoring. It has to do with power, influence, and the thin line between control and support. Fans only witnessed the public appearances, performances, and smiles, but the majority of people were unaware of the intricate web of choices, disputes, and behind-the-scenes tensions. Bishop Eddie Long's name was no longer just associated with megarch impact and stirring sermons by the middle of the 2000s. It started to be linked to controversy. A number of young men made accusations alleging wrongdoing in the church. Both his church and the larger gospel world were taken aback by these accusations. Many people's perceptions of a guy they had admired as a mentor, spiritual leader, and role model were destroyed by the news. The public's attention remained unrelenting despite the delicate and complicated legal issues. Every speech, every sermon, every appearance was scrutinized by the media. Suddenly, every association was scrutinized, even ties to powerful people like Kirk Franklin. Franklin, who was renowned for his candor and willingness to defy expectations, was walking a tightrope. He had to retain his music career and reputation while striking a balance between faith, loyalty, and public opinion. Many people are unaware of how far Long's legal struggles had an impact outside of the courtroom. The disputes brought up difficult issues of leadership's duties to their followers, accountability within the gospel community, and the impact of well-known pastors on up-and-coming gospel singers. Being intimately linked to Long through partnerships and public appearances, Kirk Franklin emerged as a significant player in these conversations. According to several sources, throughout this time, confidential discussions, counsel, and advice were given but never disclosed. Franklin's own career was changing at the same time. More social concerns, individual hardships, and occasionally nuanced criticisms of the church's structures were all being addressed in his music. Some fans and analysts hypothesize that what he's seen directly in Long's ministry may have contributed to his greater willingness to tackle delicate subjects in his songs. Authority, sway, and the imperfections that even spiritual leaders may have. This is where a lot of insiders were taken aback. Both men's reactions during the height of Long's issues were influenced by behind-the-scenes meetings, discussions, and negotiations as Franklin was negotiating these ethical and professional complexities. Franklin's influence and guidance were reportedly sought both privately and publicly, according to sources, underscoring the interconnectedness of their decision-making and careers. Few people outside of the close circle were ever aware of this aspect of gospel history. Furthermore, the Eddie Long scandal made many people in the gospel music industry face hard realities. To what extent should an artist support problematic individuals? What effects do public associations have on a person's ministry, career, and credibility? Both personal loyalty and a strategic understanding of the gospel industry's delicate balance between faith influence and public image were evident in Franklin's cautious but encouraging approach. Nevertheless, both men maintained their enormous influence on evangelical culture in the face of scandal and criticism. Millions of people were still inspired by Franklin's albums, and Long's church had a sizable congregation, demonstrating the tenacity of religious organizations even when their leaders are publicly criticized. However, the untold story, the intimate discussions, the mentoring connections, and the nuanced power struggles expose the complexity of relationships in the gospel world when controversy, faith, and celebrity all come together. And this is the cliffhanger. There were times when not many people were aware of the controversies. Examples of how Franklin and Long's connection might have shielded reputations, stopped additional repercussions, or influenced important decisions behind the scenes. These disclosures depict not only a contentious situation, but also one of strategy, influence, and the unsaid ties that bound two of the most influential people in gospel. Although Kirk Franklin and Bishop Eddie Long were viewed by the general public as prominent personalities in gospel music and ministry, their personal relationship was much more complicated and nuanced. Under the surface, there were partnerships, mentorships, and calculated exchanges that influenced the course of both men's careers and, eventually, the gospel industry as a whole. Despite his growing notoriety, Kirk Franklin always respected the experience of more seasoned leaders. Franklin naturally turned to Bishop Eddie Long for advice because of his extensive network, strong voice, and institutional clout, but mentoring in the gospel community is rarely one-sided. Long profited from Franklin's cultural significance, while Franklin received knowledge about audience influence, ministry strategy, and leadership, a contemporary take on gospel music and the capacity to engage younger listeners. They developed a mutually beneficial partnership that went well beyond the pulpit and stage. According to insiders, Long's counsel quietly influenced many of Franklin's choices about industrial alliances, collaborations, and concert tours. At the same time, Long frequently used Franklin's notoriety to promote national campaigns, special programs, and church gatherings. Franklin benefited from increased prominence within church networks and gospel communities that might not have been available otherwise, while Long gained an unparalleled cultural reach as a result. However, tensions can arise in covert collaborations. Disagreements were frequent behind the scenes, according to people close to both men. Long's commanding leadership style occasionally contrasted with Franklin's outspoken attitude. Sometimes, decisions involving speaking engagements, album promotions, or religious endorsements resulted in contentious debates and meticulous negotiations. But the general public hardly ever saw these moments. They were resolved in secret, frequently with the help of family members, trusted co-workers, or mutual counselors. This is when it becomes even more illuminating. According to reports, some of the mentorship dynamics touch on delicate subjects, including handling media and church criticism, navigating scandals, and maintaining one's public image. Long's more conventional approaches were occasionally contested by Franklin, who was renowned for pushing musical limits. On the other hand, Long's decades of ministry experience taught Franklin about negotiation, influence, and the fallout from public blunders. Together, they managed to strike a careful balance between their own integrity, public expectations, and faith. The covert relationships went beyond the two of them, however, not without the occasional concession and tough decision. Church leaders, business executives, and other gospel musicians were all impacted by their network. Franklin and Long's private judgments frequently had repercussions, influencing church partnerships, album releases, and even leadership choices in churches around the nation. Because of this covert, calculated, and hardly recognized public impact, a large portion of the story was kept secret for many years. The loyalty element, however, was arguably the most alluring feature of their private connection. Franklin and Long continued to appreciate and protect one another in spite of disputes, scandals, and public scrutiny. According to some insiders, Franklin's assistance during Long's legal disputes was motivated by more than just friendship. It was also based on an awareness of the risks, the harm to one's reputation, the spiritual obligation, and the wider ramifications for gospel culture. This is the cliffhanger that not many people are aware of. There were times when Franklin might have subtly impacted the resolution of delicate situations, even if the general public believed their contacts were solely ceremonial or professional. Choices that might have altered how the public saw both men if they had been made sooner. Their alliance and mentorship have a secret history that goes beyond simple cooperation. It has to do with allegiance, influence, and the invisible forces that control power in the gospel sector. The legends of Kirk Franklin and Bishop Eddie Long had evolved beyond mere accounts of their musical prowess or ecclesiastical leadership by the late 2000s. In the gospel world, they served as case studies of power, influence, and the complex realities of public life. Many people's perceptions of the relationship between faith, celebrity, and responsibility have been altered by their covert past, which was full of alliances, mentorship, scandals, and behind-the-scenes discussions. As one of the most influential people in gospel music today, Kirk Franklin has left behind a legacy that includes not only groundbreaking records and memorable performances, but also negotiating difficult moral and interpersonal situations in a society where religion and business coexist. Clash. He was able to comprehend the more general mechanisms of influence in the music industry and the church thanks to his partnerships and affiliations, particularly with significant individuals like Eddie Long. He also learned the value of strategic prudence, integrity, and handling delicate circumstances with poise. Bishop Eddie Long, on the other hand, is still remembered for his diverse legacy. On the one side, he transformed American ministry, inspired innumerable disciples, and established a flourishing megarch. On the other hand, his public disputes revealed weaknesses, errors, and the results of unbridled power. His contacts with Franklin, which were both complex and encouraging, brought to light the fine line that separates loyalty, mentoring, and the obligations that come with great power. The most notable aspect is the enduring lesson on influence. Their covert past shows that connections and mentoring are rarely straightforward. They entail negotiation, strategy, and perhaps compromise. The narrative of Franklin and Long demonstrates that power and loyalty relationships are profoundly human and occasionally morally complex, even in communities that are based on morality and faith. Fans could notice the honors, the music, as well as the sermons. However, the true tale is found in the choices made behind closed doors, choices that influence reputations, jobs, and even the gospel industry. This is the crucial realization. Although the public frequently makes snap judgments based on outside appearances, the inner reality might be much more nuanced. Long's power, Franklin's prudence, and their complex relationship formed a web of influence that was strategic, protective, and occasionally contentious. It serves as a reminder that every public figure works behind the scenes in layers of confidential agreements, partnerships, and moral judgments that are rarely seen. Their combined influences still have an impact on gospel music and ministry today, despite the controversy. Younger generations of artists are still motivated by Franklin's creative approach to gospel. Even though it was marred by controversy, Long's vision and leadership transformed how megarchs function and how pastors view outreach and influence. Their careers' interactions show the significant and perhaps unnoticed influence of strategic alliances and mentoring in influencing history. In the end, Kirk Franklin and Bishop Eddie Long's narrative is about more than simply controversy. It explores the intricacies of interpersonal connections within influential organizations, the difficulties of striking a balance between fame and faith, and the lessons learned when ambition and influence collide. It concerns accountability, openness, and the occasionally obscure realities of leadership.